All right, number 36, write an equation for the line described. Write the equation in the form described. All right, so they want us to write the equation of a line that is perpendicular to negative 2x plus y equals 6 and goes through the point 5, 3, and they want us to write that equation in slope-intercept form. And as I've talked about previously in this review series, we need two pieces of information in order to graph, or rather write, the equation of a line. We need a slope and we need a point. All right, well, let's see. Do we have a slope? Have they given us a slope explicitly? No, not quite, right? So we're still missing a slope, but how about a point? Have they given us a point? Yeah, they gave us the point 5, 3. So we've got our point. We need to find the slope. And to do that, we're going to use the equation that they gave us. They gave us the equation of another line, negative 2x plus y equals 6, and they tell us our line, the line we're coming up with, is perpendicular to this line. So what that means is that we need to find the slope of this line, and based on that, we can find the perpendicular slope. All right, so let's go ahead and we're going to take 2x plus y equals 6. And let's find the slope of this line. And to do that, we're going to put this into y equals mx plus b, right? Because y equals mx plus b is the only form of a line where we can clearly identify the slope. Right now, we can't clearly identify what the slope is, but once we solve for y, we'll be able to see what the slope is. So if we want y all by itself, all we have to do is quickly add 2x to both sides, and that'll leave us with y equals positive 2x plus 6. And now the given equation is in y equals mx plus b. We can clearly identify that the slope of the given line is positive 2. All right, but we don't want the slope of the given line. We want the perpendicular slope of the given line. So if this line has a slope of positive 2, the perpendicular slope will be the opposite reciprocal of this, right? So we can write 2 as a fraction, 2 over 1, which means that the opposite reciprocal will be negative 1/2, right? We're looking for the opposite reciprocal. And opposite simply refers to the sign. So in this case, if the given line has a positive slope, the opposite says we need a negative slope. And reciprocal, we know, just means flip. So if we have 2 over 1, flipping it gives us 1 over 2. And so the slope we're going to use is going to be negative 1/2. All right, so now we have the two pieces of information that we need. We have a slope, which we just found, and we have the given point, 5, 3. So when you have a point and you have a slope, you're going to take these two pieces of information and plug them into the point-slope form. And hopefully you'll recall from class that the point-slope form is y minus y sub 1 equals m times x minus x sub 1. All right, and of course the m here is the slope we're going to use, and the point is 5, 3, or in this case x1, y1. So this is going to be 3. This will be our 5. We're going to take this information, plug it in, and do some manipulating so that we can end up with something that's in slope-intercept form. All right, so let's go ahead and do that then. So we have y minus y1. Well, what's y1? That's simply 3. Equals m, and we know our m is negative 1/2 times quantity x minus x1. Well, that's just 5. All right, let's go ahead and clean this up a little. We'll distribute that minus through. We'll distribute this negative through. So we end up with y minus 3 equals negative 1/2 times the quantity x minus 5. All right, so we're getting closer to the end here. Now at this stage, we can do one of two things. You can either distribute this minus 1/2 through to this binomial here, Or what I like to do is I like to clear this fraction. I don't particularly want to work with this fraction, and so to clear it, what we're going to do is we're going to multiply this equation by the common denominator, and in this case our common denominator is going to be 2. So we're going to multiply this equation by 2, which is the same thing as saying multiply in these three places. You multiply your y by the common denominator, you multiply your y1 by the common denominator, and then you multiply your slope by the common denominator. You don't multiply anything in this quantity here. Think of these parentheses as kind of being like protective barriers. You can't distribute, or rather multiply by your common denominator inside this quantity. All right, so when we multiply by the common denominator, we get 2 times y, which is just 2y. We get 2 times -3, which is -6. Here, this 2 cancels with that 2, and so we're left with simply a -1 times now this quantity x minus 5. And now we can go ahead and distribute this negative through the binomial here. And I think it's a lot easier to distribute a -1 versus a -1/2. Again, you don't have to do this step. If you're comfortable with your fractions and you don't mind working with them, go for it. All right, let me go ahead and give us some room here. So if you don't have this copied down, go ahead and pause the video or rewind. I'm going to get rid of it. So there's that. And then I'm going to move this up a little bit. All right, so we have 2y minus 6 equals, and now -1 times x is simply a minus x. -1 times -5 is simply a positive 5. And now again, because the directions tell us to put this in slope-intercept form, we'll go ahead and solve for y. So we'll add 6 to both sides. That'll leave us with 2y equals minus x plus 11. And if we want y all by itself, we know we're going to divide both sides by 2, and that'll give us y equals -1/2 x plus 11 halves. And there we have the equation of the line that is perpendicular to -2x plus y equals 6 and goes through the point 5, 3 in slope-intercept form. And recall, what is the slope that we use with the point slope form? We use the slope -1/2. So at the end, since this is the slope we use, we should expect to see that -1/2 come out again, right? So if we're using -1/2 as our slope and we get a different slope out, then something happened in your algebra. So go back and double check, make sure nothing happened with signs or anything like that. Because we used -1/2 at the beginning as our slope, we would expect the slope of the line that we're finding to have that same slope. And so we do, which is kind of a quick check to make sure that everything worked out, all right? So here we have y equals -1/2 x plus 11 halves, number 36.